My mother-in-law gave my son a gift filled with peanuts for Christmas, fully aware he has a life-threatening allergy, and then brushed it off as a simple mix-up. I administered his emergency medication and rushed him to the hospital, where I made sure to document everything for the authorities. She thought it was a careless mistake. She's about to find out it was a crime. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The festive cacophony of Christmas morning at my in-laws' house was a familiar symphony of chaos. Wrapping paper lay in glittering drifts across the carpet, children's shrieks of delight punctuated the drone of holiday music, and the air was thick with the scent of pine needles and roasting turkey. My 6-year-old son, Leo, was vibrating with an energy so pure it was practically a power source. His world had narrowed to the pile of brightly colored boxes under the tree, each one a universe of possibility. I was perched on the arm of the sofa, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, my gaze fixed on him. As the mother of a child with a severe peanut allergy, my vigilance was a permanent, humming frequency beneath the surface of my thoughts. Holidays, with their endless platters of shared foods and well-meaning relatives, were a minefield. I had prepped for this day like a general planning a campaign, providing a list of safe foods, bringing my own container of Leo-safe cookies, and triple-checking that his EpiPens were in my purse. My husband, Mark, was playing Santa, handing out the remaining gifts. And this one is for Leo, from Grandma Carol. My mother-in-law, Carol, beamed from her armchair, a portrait of benevolent matriarchy. "It's a special basket, sweetie," she called out, "just for you." Leo scrambled forward, his small hands grabbing the large, cellophane-wrapped basket. It was beautifully arranged, a cornucopia of treats nestled in a bed of crinkly red and green paper. But as he turned it over, my breath hitched. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. Through the clear wrapping, I saw them. Not just one or two, but dozens. There were chocolate bars with telltale bumpy textures, bags of gourmet trail mix, and decorative tins of cookies whose labels, even from across the room, I could recognize. They were all loaded with peanuts. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Leo's fingers fumbling with the ribbon, his face alight with excitement. I saw my husband smiling, oblivious. I saw Carol, her expression smooth and unreadable. A cold wave washed over me, so chilling it felt like ice water in my veins. "Leo, honey, wait," I said, my voice tight but steady. I moved quickly, crossing the room in 3 strides and gently taking the basket from his grasp before he could breach the cellophane barrier. His face fell, but Mommy, Grandma gave it to me. "I know, sweetie. Let's just put it aside for a moment and open another one, okay?" I placed the basket on the highest shelf of the bookcase, my back to the room. My hands were trembling, but my movements were deliberate. Mark looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Elena, what's wrong?" Before I could answer, Carol spoke, her tone light and breezy. "Oh, silly me," she said with a little laugh. "I think I must have gotten the grandkids' gifts mixed up. That one was for Chloe." Chloe was my niece, a healthy 9-year-old with no known allergies. The lie was so effortless, so practiced, but it was a lie. Chloe's gifts were always wrapped in unicorn paper and were invariably some combination of dolls and art supplies. She hated nuts. Everyone knew that. "It's fine," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I forced a smile for Leo's sake, pulling him onto my lap and handing him a different present. But as he tore into the new box, my eyes met Carol S. across the room. She held my gaze for a fraction of a second, and in that moment I saw it, a flicker of something cold, something triumphant. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual mask of mild-mannered innocence. But I had seen it. This was no mix-up. This was a message. This was an attack, veiled in holiday cheer and plausible deniability. As Leo's laughter filled the room once more, a single, horrifying thought echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. The casualness of her excuse was more poisonous than the peanuts themselves. Just then, my sister-in-law walked in with a tray of appetizers, one of which was a bowl of peanut brittle. A piece had crumbled off onto the carpet near where Leo was now sitting. He hadn't noticed it, but I did. My gaze shot back to the gift basket, then to the brittle on the floor. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the whole house was contaminated. Before I could even process the new threat, I saw it. Leo, distracted by a new toy, H. Ad shifted his position. His hand brushed against the floor, right where the crumbly, peanut-laden candy had fallen. A tiny piece clung to his finger. And then, as 6-year-olds do, he put his finger in his mouth. It happened in an instant. His eyes went wide. He started to cough, a small, tight sound that immediately escalated into a desperate, wheezing gasp for air. Red splotches erupted on his cheeks and neck like tiny, angry flames. The room fell silent. Everyone froze, their smiles frozen on their faces. For me, the world snapped into sharp, painful focus. I scooped Leo into my arms, my mind a blizzard of emergency protocols. "Mark, my purse! Now!" I commanded, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. He was paralyzed for a second before my urgency jolted him into action. He tossed me the purse, and my fingers, miraculously steady, closed around the familiar tube of the EpiPen. I ripped off the cap, pressed the auto-injector firmly against Leo's thigh, and held it there for the 3-second count that felt like an eternity. The click of the injector was the loudest sound I had ever heard. "I'm calling an ambulance," my brother-in-law said, already fumbling for his phone. "No time," I snapped, already moving toward the door. "The hospital is 5 minutes away. It's faster if I drive." I wrapped Leo in his coat, his breathing still ragged and shallow. As I pushed through the sea of shocked relatives, I passed Carol. She was standing by the fireplace, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with what anyone else would have called horror. But I saw the calculation behind the performance. "Oh, Alina, I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured remorse. "It was just a mix-up, a terrible, terrible mix-up." I didn't stop. I didn't even look at her. I held my son tight against my chest, his life in my hands, and walked out of that house without a backward glance. The real mix-up, I thought, as the cold winter air hit my face, was hers. She had mixed up a passive-aggressive game with a potentially fatal act, and she had mixed up her daughter-in-law with someone who would ever let her get away with it. The emergency room was a sterile, unforgiving white. The cheerful red and green of the holiday decorations that dotted the walls felt like a mockery. Leo was on a gurney, hooked up to a heart monitor whose steady beeping was the only comfort in the room. The epinephrine had worked, halting the anaphylactic shock in its tracks, but he was pale and groggy, the allergic reaction and the powerful medicine leaving him utterly drained. I sat beside him, holding his small hand, my own adrenaline slowly giving way to a cold, hard rage that settled deep in my bones. Mark arrived a few minutes after me, his face ashen. He had followed in his own car, and the short drive had clearly given him time to process the sheer terror of what had happened. He knelt by Leo's bed, stroking his hair, his eyes filled with a father's love and fear. "He's okay," I said, my voice flat. "They're keeping him for observation for a few hours, but he's stable." "Thank God," Mark breathed, slumping into the chair on the other side of the bed. "Elena, I can't believe that happened. I am so sorry." "It's not your fault, Mark." "But it's my mother," he said, his voice cracking. I should have checked the gift." He looked at me, his expression pleading. "She's devastated. She called me on the way here, just sobbing her heart out. She keeps saying she just grabbed the wrong basket." I stared at him. The protective layer of denial he wrapped around his mother was as predictable as it was infuriating. For years, I had watched Carol chip away at our peace with her innocent comments and forgetful moments, and every time Mark had an excuse ready. "She's from a different generation. She doesn't mean it that way. You're being too sensitive." "Mark," I said, my voice low and intense, "this wasn't a mix-up." He recoiled slightly. "Elena, not now, she feels terrible enough as it is. It was a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. No, I insisted, my grip tightening on Leo's hand. It was deliberate, I saw her face. You saw what you wanted to see because you two don't get along, he shot back, his voice rising in frustration. My mother would never, ever intentionally hurt her own grandson. How can you even think that? My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Carol. I ignored it. A moment later, Mark's phone buzzed. He answered it, his voice hushed. Mom, yes, he's stable. No, you can't talk to her right now. We're busy. He listened for a moment, his face a mixture of pity and exasperation. Mom, please, stop crying. It was an accident. We know that. Okay, I'll call you later. Bye. He hung up and looked at me, his eyes begging for understanding. She's a wreck. She can't stop crying. She said she'll never forgive herself. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, my silence a heavier accusation than any words could be. The doctor came in then, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, and her presence broke the tension. She explained the follow-up procedures, the need to refill the EpiPen prescription, and the importance of continued observation. As she was about to leave, she paused at the door. Just so you're aware, she said, her tone becoming more formal, in cases like this, where there's a potential for endangerment, especially with a known, severe allergy, the hospital has a mandatory reporting policy. A social worker will need to speak with you before you're discharged. Mark's face went white. A social worker? You mean like Child Protective Services? It's just a precaution, the doctor said gently, to ensure the child's home environment is safe. It's protocol. After she left, Mark stared at the closed door in disbelief. CPS, they think that we're hurting him. No, Mark, I said, my voice taking on a new clarity. The fog of my anger was beginning to part, replaced by the sharp, focused thinking of my professional life. I was a paralegal. I lived in a world of evidence, documentation, and consequence. They're not investigating us. They're investigating the incident. They're making sure Leo is safe from the person who caused this. Mark just shook his head, running his hands through his hair. This is a nightmare, a complete nightmare. It was an accident, and now my mother is going to have CPS called on her. This will destroy her. I watched him, a chasm opening between us. He was worried about his mother's feelings. I was worried about my son's life. In that moment, something inside me hardened. He could live in his world of denial if he wanted to. I was going to live in the world of facts, and I was going to arm myself with them. I looked at my sleeping son, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The beeping of the monitor was a countdown. Carol thought she was playing a petty game of emotional chess. She thought I was just a hysterical mother who would eventually calm down and accept another hollow apology. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten what I do for a living. She had forgotten I deal with facts, not feelings. And the facts of this case were about to become her worst nightmare. The fight to keep Leo safe had been the central mission of my life since he was diagnosed at 18 months old. It wasn't just about reading labels and carrying EpiPens. It was a complete reordering of our existence. Our home became a fortress, a guaranteed safe zone scrubbed of any trace of his allergen. I learned to bake from scratch, bread, cookies, birthday cakes, so I would always know every single ingredient. I became an educator, patiently but firmly explaining the stakes to teachers, babysitters, and other parents. I made sacrifices without a second thought, turning down social invitations to potlucks, avoiding certain restaurants, and managing the constant, low-grade anxiety that hummed beneath every family gathering. It was a labor of love, a sacred duty I performed without complaint. Carol, however, had always treated my diligence as a personal affront, a dramatic overreaction she was determined to undermine. Her campaign was one of 1,000 tiny cuts. When Leo was a toddler, she'd forget and try to give him a cookie from a bakery platter, sighing, "Oh, a little bit won't hurt him, will it?" In my day, we weren't so afraid of everything. She'd buy him soaps and lotions with almond oil, another of his known allergens, and feign surprise when I would quietly take them away. "I can't keep track of all your rules, Alina," she'd say, making it sound like my son's medical needs were a set of arbitrary, controlling regulations I had invented to inconvenience her. The worst was her obsession with folk remedies and crackpot theories she found online. She'd ambush me with articles about exposing allergic children to microdoses of their allergen, a dangerous practice that she presented as cutting-edge science. "I was just reading," she'd begin, her voice full of faux helpfulness, "that you're actually making it worse by being so protective. His body needs to learn to fight it." Each suggestion was a subtle accusation. "You are a bad mother. You are coddling him. You are the problem." Mark, bless his heart, was caught in the crossfire. He saw these instances as isolated, thoughtless blunders. "She's just trying to help," he'd say after another one of Carol's unsolicited medical lectures. "She loves Leo. She's just old-fashioned and doesn't understand." He saw his mother as a well-meaning but slightly clumsy woman who grew up in a different world. He didn't see the pattern. He didn't see the malice. Carol herself was a master of appearances. To the outside world, she was the perfect grandmother. Impeccably dressed, her home always pristine, her social media feeds a curated gallery of happy family moments. She was soft-spoken, rarely raised her voice, and had perfected the art of the passive-aggressive compliment. "That's a lovely dress, Alina. It's so brave of you to wear such a bold color." She wielded her victimhood like a weapon. Any attempt to set a boundary was met with wounded tears and accusations of being cruel or difficult, which always sent Mark rushing to defend and appease her. Her excuse about mixing up the gifts was, on its surface, designed to be just plausible enough to give Mark cover. Her other grandchild, Mark's niece Chloe, did exist, but the idea that this basket was ever intended for her was laughable. Chloe was 9 years old and deep in a princess and unicorn phase. For her birthday 2 months prior, Carol had gifted her a massive, glittering dollhouse. For Christmas, as I knew from my sister-in-law, she had asked for a specific line of collector's dolls and a new tablet. A generic basket of gourmet nuts and chocolates would have been a bizarrely impersonal and inappropriate gift for her, and completely out of character for Carol, who prided herself on her thoughtful, personalized gift-giving. The gift tag, which I had slipped into my pocket before leaving for the hospital, was the final, damning piece of the puzzle. It was written in Carol's elegant, looping cursive, "To my dear Leo. Merry Christmas. Love, Grandma Carol." There was no confusion, no ambiguity. Sitting in that sterile hospital room, the history of Carol's behavior played out in my mind like a legal brief. Each past incident was a piece of evidence, a prior act demonstrating a pattern of negligence and disregard for my son's safety. The forgotten cookies, the almond oil lotion, the dangerous advice, they weren't random mistakes. They were escalating tests of my boundaries. She had been pushing and pushing, and I had been patiently pushing back, trying to keep the peace for Mark's sake. But this time, she had gone too far. She had mistaken my patience for weakness. She had gambled that she could nearly kill my son and hide behind a flimsy excuse and a flood of crocodile tears. That gamble was about to cost her everything. The doctor's mention of the mandatory reporting policy was the spark that lit the fuse. As a paralegal, the words protocol, documentation, and reporting were the native language of my world. They cut through the emotional storm of fear and anger, offering a clear, logical path forward. While Mark was spiraling, consumed with the emotional fallout and the nightmare of a CPS investigation, my mind was already shifting gears. I was no longer just a panicked mother. I was a case manager, and my son's safety was the case. When we were finally discharged, with a sleeping Leo bundled in my arms, I felt a sense of resolve crystallize within me. The first thing I did when we got home was put Leo to bed in our room, where I could watch him. The second thing I did was begin to build my file. I walked into the living room, which felt alien and tainted now, the festive decorations mocking the trauma of the morning. There, on the high bookshelf, was the instrument of the crime, the gift basket. I put on a pair of disposable gloves from the kitchen, a habit from my office when handling sensitive documents, and carefully lifted it down. My phone became my primary tool. I photographed the basket from every angle. I took close-ups of the brand names, the cellophane wrapping still intact. Then I carefully opened it. Inside, the assault was even more blatant than I'd realized. It wasn't just a few items. There was a tin of peanut brittle, a bag of chocolate-covered peanuts, several high-end chocolate bars whose ingredient lists prominently featured peanuts, and even a jar of peanut butter-filled pretzels. It was a curated collection of everything that could kill my son. I laid each item out on the dining room table, a grim tableau of malice. I photographed each one individually, making sure the labels listing peanuts in bold letters were clearly visible. I photographed the gift tag, with Leo written in Carol's unmistakable script, next to the items. Every photo was time-stamped, a perfect, unimpeachable digital record. Next, I sat down at my laptop and opened a new document. I began to write, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I detailed the events of the day with cold, legal precision. The time the gift was given, Carol's exact words, the precise moment Leo came into contact with the allergen from the other dish, the onset of his symptoms, the administration of the EpiPen, the time we arrived at the hospital. I was creating a narrative, a sworn affidavit of the facts. Then I started digging deeper. My mind, now fully in paralegal mode, was searching for precedents, for a pattern of behavior. I remembered an incident from the previous summer. We'd been at a family barbecue, and Carol had brought a plate of her famous oatmeal cookies. I had asked her dyer, "CTLY, as I always did, are these Leo safe?" She had smiled and said, "Of course, dear. I made them with applesauce instead of oil, just like you taught me." Leo had eaten half a cookie before complaining that his mouth felt tingly. I'd acted fast, giving him a dose of Benadryl, which, thankfully, was enough to handle the mild reaction. When I'd confronted Carol, she'd put a hand to her chest in theatrical horror. "Oh, my goodness, I completely forgot. I used almond flour instead of regular flour. Just a little bit for flavor. It must have slipped my mind." At the time, Mark had dismissed it as another one of his mother's senior moments. But now, it was Exhibit B. I scrolled through my old emails, my heart pounding. I was looking for something specific, a piece of leverage I knew had to be there. And then I found it. 2 weeks before Christmas, I had sent a group email to the entire family with the subject line, "Friendly reminder, Leo's Christmas safety and gift guide." It was a cheerful but firm email, listing his allergens and offering a dozen links to safe, fun, nut-free toys and treats he would love. It was my annual attempt to make it easy for everyone to keep him safe. And there it was, Carol's reply sent the very next day. "Thank you for the list, Alina, so helpful." I saved the email as a PDF. This was the clever trap, the linchpin of the entire case. Her mix-up and forgetfulness were no longer plausible defenses. They were now provable lies. She hadn't just been negligent, she had acknowledged receipt of the exact information that would have prevented this accident. I compiled everything into a single, password-protected folder on my computer. The time-stamped photos, my detailed affidavit, a summary of past incidents, and the damning email chain. This was no longer about a family squabble. This was a meticulously documented case of child endangerment, and I would be presenting it not to my husband, but to the authorities. Carol thought she had made a move in her petty game against me. She had no idea she had just handed me every piece I needed to checkmate her for good. Mark came home late that evening, looking utterly defeated. He had spent the afternoon at his parents' house, a misguided mission of diplomacy that had clearly backfired. He sank onto the sofa, the weight of the day etched into every line on his face. "I talked to her," he said, his voice raspy. She's a complete mess. My dad is furious, not at her, but at the situation, at us. He thinks we're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. Leo was asleep in our bed, his breathing finally even, but the image of his red, swollen face was seared into my memory. "Our son was in the emergency room, Mark. How is that an overreaction?" "She says it was an accident," he pleaded, his voice rising. "She swears she just grabbed the wrong basket in a rush. She's beside herself with guilt. She says you wouldn't even look at her, that you're treating her like a criminal." The familiar script, the performance. Carol was already spinning her narrative, painting herself as the heartbroken victim and me as the cold, unforgiving villain. And Mark, my dear, conflict-averse husband, had walked right into the theater and taken his assigned seat. "I see," I said softly. I didn't want to fight with him. I needed him to see the truth, not have it shoved down his throat. I walked over to the dining room table, where my evidence was still laid out like a post-mortem examination. I switched on the overhead light. "Mark," I said, my voice steady, "I want you to look at this." He dragged himself over to the table, his eyes scanning the array of peanut-laden products. "I know, Alina, it's horrible." "No, I mean really look," I urged. I pushed one of the photos I had taken toward him. It was a close-up of the gift tag. "What does that say?" He squinted at the phone screen. "To my dear Leo," he read aloud, his voice faltering. "Love, Grandma Carol." He looked up at me, a crack appearing in his wall of denial. "Now look at this," I said, pushing another photo toward him. It showed the gift basket next to the unicorn-themed presents Chloe had actually received, which were still sitting in a pile by the fireplace. "Does that basket look like something Mom would buy for Chloe? A 9-year-old girl who loves dolls and hates nuts." He stared at the picture, the visual evidence undeniable. The frilly, pink-and-purple mountain of Chloe's gifts stood in stark contrast to the sophisticated, adult-looking basket of gourmet snacks. He said nothing. "She knew what she was doing, Mark," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Just like she forgot about the almond flour in the cookies last summer." His head snapped up. "That was different. That was a small mistake." "Was it?" I pressed. "Or was it a test, to see what she could get away with?" The color drained from his face as the pieces began to click into place. 4. Ming, a picture he had spent years refusing to see. The phone on the counter rang, shrill and demanding. It was Carol. Mark's instinct was to ignore it, but I shook my head. "Answer it," I said, "and put it on speaker." He hesitated, then swiped to answer, his thumb hovering over the speaker icon before pressing it. "Hello." "Mark, honey?" Carol's voice was thick with manufactured tears. "Is Leo all right? I've been worried sick. Your wife won't answer my calls. She's punishing me, Mark. I made one little mistake, and she's treating me like some kind of monster." I watched Mark's face. He was listening to the words, but for the first time, he seemed to be hearing the manipulation beneath them. The self-pity, the accusations, the complete lack of genuine concern for the little boy who had been gasping for air just hours earlier. "Mom," Mark said, his own voice sounding strained and unfamiliar to him. "The basket was full of peanuts. The tag said it was for Leo." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I must have written the wrong name on the tag in my haste," she stammered, the lie thin and unconvincing. "I was so flustered with all the Christmas rush. You know how it is. Elena is blowing this completely out of proportion. Is she going to talk to that social worker? She can't do that, Mark. It would humiliate me. It would destroy this family." The threat was clear. Choose me or your wife, make her stop. Mark looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening understanding. He looked at the photographs on the table, at the clear evidence of intent. The carefully constructed image of his loving, doting mother was shattering before his eyes, and the reality was ugly and terrifying. "I have to go, Mom," he said, his voice flat. He hung up the phone without saying goodbye. The silence that filled the room was heavy and profound. The first major crack in his denial had appeared, and I knew, with a grim certainty, that the foundation was about to crumble entirely. The call from Child Protective Services came 2 days later. I spoke with a social worker named Mrs. Davis, a calm, professional woman whose tone conveyed both empathy and seriousness. I explained that I was a paralegal and had already prepared a file. I emailed her the password-protected folder containing the photographs, my detailed affidavit, and the summary of past incidents. I walked her through the events with factual precision, leaving emotion out of it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line when I finished. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez," she said finally, her professional reserve tinged with something that sounded like shock. This is incredibly thorough. We will be looking into this immediately. The official investigation sent Carol into a full-blown panic. Her strategy shifted from tearful victim to cornered animal. She launched a campaign of disinformation, calling every relative in Mark's family to deliver her heavily edited version of the story. In her telling, she was the devoted grandmother being persecuted by a vindictive, unstable daughter-in-law who was trying to tear the family apart. She claimed I was mentally unwell, hysterical, and had always been jealous of her close relationship with Mark. The family, predictably, began to take sides. Mark's phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all urging him to control his wife and put an end to this embarrassing family drama. The pressure on him was immense. He was caught between the family he had known his whole life and the horrifying truth that was slowly dawning on him. He grew quiet and withdrawn, the internal war making him a ghost in our own home. While the family drama swirled, I focused on my case. I was looking for the final, irrefutable piece of evidence, the knockout blow that would eliminate any shred of plausible deniability. And then I remembered it. The Christmas gift guide, the email I sent out every year. My heart hammered against my ribs as I booted up my laptop. I typed Leo's Christmas safety into my email search bar. The results populated instantly. There it was, sent on December 10th. And there, beneath it, was Carol's reply. "Thank you for the list, Alina. So helpful." I printed the entire email chain. The black ink on the white paper was stark and damning. Her acknowledgement was the key. It proved knowledge. It proved she had received and understood the explicit safety instructions just 2 weeks before she handed our son a basket of poison. The mix-up, forgetfulness, and haste excuses were now not just improbable, they were impossible. It was the irrefutable proof of either malicious intent or a level of negligence, so profound it amounted to the same thing. That evening, I found Mark sitting in the dark in his study, his head in his hands. The family pressure had clearly reached a breaking point. His father had been calling him all day, demanding he be a man and fix the mess I had supposedly created. "I don't know what to do, Alina," he whispered, not looking at me. "My dad says. He says Mom is talking about getting a lawyer, that you're slandering her." I didn't say a word. I simply walked over to his desk, turned on the lamp, and laid the printed email on the desk in front of him. He looked down at it, confused at first. He read my original email, his eyes scanning the familiar list of rules and safe suggestions. Then he saw her reply. He read it once, then he read it again. He traced her name on the page with his finger, as if to confirm it was real. "She replied to it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She saw the list." "She saw the list, Mark," I confirmed gently. "She knew." That was it. The final pillar of his denial crumbled into dust. The truth, in all its ugliness, was laid bare on his desk. His mother hadn't just made a mistake. She hadn't just been careless. She had been given the clear, simple information needed to keep her grandson safe, acknowledged it, and then done the exact opposite. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it stole my breath. It was the agony of a lifetime of love and trust curdling into betrayal. "Oh, God," he said, burying his face in his hands. "What has she done?" The question wasn't directed at me. It was a cry of anguish from a son who had just realized his mother was not the person he thought she was. At that moment, I knew the war for his allegiance was over. He was no longer on her side or in the middle. He was on ours. He was on Leo's. 2 weeks into the new year, my father-in-law, Frank, called. His tone was heavy, authoritative, and brokered no argument. He was summoning us to a family meeting that weekend. The objective, he stated, was not to place blame but to heal this unfortunate rift and move forward as a family. It was a transparent ambush. They weren't seeking reconciliation, they were seeking surrender. They wanted to circle the wagons, pressure us into dropping the CPS complaint, and force a public performance of forgiveness that would restore the family's carefully maintained facade. Mark, now fully awakened to his mother's manipulations, wanted to refuse. "It's a trap, Alina. They're just going to gang up on you." I know, I said calmly. And we're going to walk right into it, but we're not going in undefended. We spent the next few days preparing. I coached Mark, not on what to say, but on how to stay calm, to stick to the facts, and not to get drawn into the emotional chaos they would inevitably try to create. Our goal was not to win an argument. It was to state our position, establish a permanent boundary, and leave. We arrived at my in-laws' house on Sunday afternoon. The mood was funereal. Mark's father, sister, brother-in-law, and two of his aunts were assembled in the living room, a grim-faced jury. And there, in her usual armchair, sat Carol. She was dressed in a soft, dove-gray sweater, her face pale and artfully tear-streaked. She looked like a woman on the verge of collapsing from grief. It was a masterful performance. We sat on the sofa opposite her, a silent, united front. Frank cleared his throat and began, his voice resonating with patriarchal authority. "We're all here because we love this family," he said, looking pointedly at me. "And it has been heartbreaking to see it torn apart by this misunderstanding. Carol has been suffering immensely." Carol, on cue, let out a soft, choked sob. "I just love my grandson so much," she whispered, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "I would never, ever hurt him. It was a mistake. A terrible, foolish mistake in the Christmas rush. I know you're angry, Alina. But to bring strangers, the government, into our private family matters, it's a cruelty I never thought you capable of." The aunts nodded in solemn agreement. The air was thick with condemnation. This was the moment they expected me to break, to apologize for my overreaction. I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "This isn't about my anger, Carol, and it certainly isn't a private family matter anymore. It became a legal matter the moment Leo stopped breathing." Frank started to interrupt, but I held up a hand. "I'm not here to argue," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room before settling back on Carol. "I'm here to state the facts. You were provided with a detailed, written list of Leo's allergens and safe gift ideas 2 weeks before Christmas. You replied to that email, so we know you received it. You then purchased a gift containing numerous, high-risk allergens, wrote Leo's name on the tag, and gave it to him. When his life was in danger, your primary concern was that it was a mix-up. And in the week since, your primary concern has been your own reputation, not your grandson's health. The Child Protective Services investigation you are so upset about is the direct, legal consequence of you. Our actions." A stunned silence fell over the room. They were not prepared for my calm, factual recitation. They were expecting hysterics. Before anyone could recover, Mark spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of his broken heart and newfound resolve. He looked directly at his mother. "Mom," he began, his voice thick with sorrow. "I have spent my entire life defending you, making excuses for you. I refused to see what Alina saw, but I see it now." Carol's eyes widened. This was not part of the script. "You put my son in the hospital," Mark continued, his voice growing stronger. "You endangered his life through a level of negligence that is impossible to understand, and then you lied about it. To me, to the family, to the authorities. You tried to blame Alina to save yourself. This isn't a mix-up, Mom. It's a betrayal. The deepest one I can imagine." He stood up, pulling me with him. "So this meeting is over. Our decision is made. We have been advised by our lawyer to seek a restraining order. We are cutting all contact with you, effective immediately. You will not see Leo. You will not see us. The health and safety of my son is the only thing that matters, and you are a threat to it." The collective gasp in the room was audible. Carol's face, stripped of its mask of victimhood, crumpled into a rictus of pure, undiluted shock. The performance was over. The jury was dismissed. She was left exposed and alone in front of the family she had tried to weaponize, her plan in tatters around her. We turned and walked out of the house, leaving the wreckage of their ambush behind us. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and in that sound, I felt the final, liberating snap of a chain that had bound our family for far too long. The aftermath of the family meeting was swift and decisive. Armed with my documentation and Mark's unwavering testimony about his mother's pattern of behavior and subsequent attempts at manipulation, the restraining order was granted by the court. It stipulated that Carol was to have no contact, direct or indirect, with me, Mark, or Leo, and was to remain at least 500 yards away from our home, Leo's school, and my place of work. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The CPS investigation concluded a few weeks later. Mrs. Davis called me personally to deliver the results. The case against Carol was substantiated as a case of neglect due to failure to protect. While it didn't rise to the level of criminal prosecution for intentional harm, a notoriously difficult charge to prove, the consequences were still significant. Carol was mandated by the court to attend a series of child safety and parenting classes. Her future contact with Leo, should the restraining order ever be lifted, would be legally restricted and subject to supervision. She was officially on the state's radar. Her reputation as the perfect matriarch was irrevocably destroyed, replaced by a formal record of endangerment. The family, as expected, fractured. My father-in-law and a few of the older relatives maintained their loyalty to Carol, treating us as pariahs who had aired the family's dirty laundry. But others, including Mark's sister, eventually came around. After the shock wore off, she called me and apologized, admitting she had been blind to her mother's subtle cruelty for years. The public, legal nature of the consequences had forced them to see the truth. The most important healing, however, happened within the walls of our own home. One evening, after Leo was asleep, Mark came to me, his eyes full of a remorse that was profound and sincere. "I am so sorry, Alina," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry it took our son almost dying for me to see what was right in front of my face. You were protecting him, and I wasn't protecting you. I let my loyalty to her cloud my judgment and my duty as your husband and a father. That will never happen again. It's you and Leo. You two are my entire world. From now on, we are a team." He wrapped his arms around me, and I leaned into him, the last vestiges of my resentment melting away. We had been tested by fire, and we had emerged not broken, but forged into something stronger. A year later, Christmas rolled around again. There were no tense trips to the in-laws, no walking on eggshells, no forced smiles. It was just the three of us in our own home. We woke up late, stayed in our pajamas, and watched Leo open his presents with unadulterated joy. The air wasn't filled with the scent of pine and turkey, but with the warm, safe aroma of the completely nut-free cinnamon rolls I had baked that morning. As Leo played on the floor with his new toys, his laughter echoing in the peaceful quiet of the house, I looked at Mark. He met my gaze and smiled, a real, untroubled smile. He reached over and took my hand. In that simple, silent moment, I felt a sense of profound peace wash over me. The war was over. Justice hadn't been about Ray. Venge, it had been about reclaiming our son's safety and our family's sanctity. We were safe. We were whole. And that was the greatest gift of all.